So as I mentioned in the introductory video, we protect our brain in 4 different ways. We've learned about the bones already. We have the bones of the skull, which are going to be a really great protector for our brains. It's solid. We haven't got many holes in it, although we've got holes for blood vessels and nerves and things. But basically, it's a solid box. It's brilliant. But then we also have membranes that we surround that with, membranes called meninges. I said meningitis. Meningitis is, itis means inflammation of the meninges, and that's a very serious disease because it's so close to the brain. We then also have this watery cushion made up of CSF, cerebrospinal fluid, and then we have the blood-brain barrier. And I'm only going to tell you this about the blood-brain barrier. I won't talk more about it. Astrocytes go around the blood vessels to give an extra layer to the blood vessels to prevent stuff from going across. And so that's also important. So these are our meninges. Maybe I should try and write more clearly so you can actually read it. Meninges. And there are 3 layers. Hopefully you can see dura here. That's from durable. It's the same root. So this is tough, and dura means tough. Mater means mother. So this is the tough mother around the brain. The next layer of the meninges, because there are 3 layers, is the arachnoid mater. Now arachnoid from arachnophobia means spider. So this is the spider mother, because it's still with mater. And then pia means gentle. So the next layer closest to the brain is the gentle mother, and it's very, very thin indeed. So those are the 3 layers that we're going to have, and we're going to see that in the skull, by the brain, we're going to have 2 layers of dura mater. So 2 layers, one next to the bone and one next to the meninges. Whereas in the spinal cord, so this is by the brain, but by the spinal cord we'll only have 1 layer. Okay, and that is how you get an epidural space. Because epi means upon or above, and because we only have 1 layer of this, we have a space above it. Whereas in the brain we have 2 layers. One goes next to the bone, so there's nothing above that apart from bone, and we certainly couldn't put an anesthetic into the bone. That would never work. Okay, so here are our layers. We have the dura mater, 2 layers of it, one directly next to the bone and one further away. But they separate as they go around the brain. The one next to the bone stays next to the skull, and that creates a space where we can put blood. If I remove that picture, remove the drawing that I've put on. Can you see how we've got the grey dura right next to the bone and the beige dura that follows the brain around? And that leaves a space where we can put blood. And that actually helps us to drain blood from the brain to take it back to the heart. So that's very important. Then beneath the dura, we have the arachnoid. You see the spidery sort of web here? That's why it's called arachnoid, because there's this spider web stuff. And that's really important because this, in the beneath the arachnoid mater, in the subarachnoid space, that's where it is. That's where we put CSF. In the subarachnoid space. So that's where our cerebrospinal fluid goes. And the cerebrospinal fluid actually gets squeezed out. We keep making cerebrospinal fluid and then squeezing it out into this venous blood that's returning back to the heart. So it comes out of arterial blood and goes back into venous blood. And that's how our cerebrospinal fluid is keeping on flowing through our brain. It's continually being made and continually being reabsorbed into the bloodstream. And then the pia mater, the gentle mother, is this layer right next to the brain itself. Very, very close, just one layer. So we've already talked a little bit about cerebrospinal fluid. I've said it's being taken from the bloodstream and it's going to be from the arterial blood, and it's just very, very watery. And then it gets continually made and continually reabsorbed into the venous blood going back to the heart. Why do we have it? Well, one, it's going to give buoyancy. It's going to give buoyancy to our brain, and it will allow us to reduce the weight of the brain, which is very, very delicate. And if the brain had to sit on our skull, which it does, without being lifted up in the fluid, it would get crushed by its own weight. It's also going to protect our brain from blows, boom, 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 yeah? And it's going to nourish the brain. It carries chemicals from the blood, and it helps to nourish the brain and clean the brain as well. So CSF is going to be both inside and outside the brain and spinal cord. It's very watery. It's coming from the plasma, which is part of our blood, and it's important that we keep it at a constant volume. If we have too much, it will cause major headaches in adults. So this is where it's made in those ventricles, which are inside the brain. We have blood vessels, and then the CSF comes out of that. And then it travels in the ventricles and then comes out and travels around the outside of the brain and returns into the venous blood that's going back to the heart. Very simple, really. And we continually make the same amount as we take back up into the bloodstream. So we make it and take it up, make it and take it up the whole time, every day. We will investigate, we will actually take some of the CSF to look and see if there are problems in it, if we think we've got a bacterial or viral infection for meningitis. If we think we've bled into that subarachnoid space, and that's called a subarachnoid hemorrhage, you can take some blood and see if there's blood. There should never be blood in the CSF. If we think you've got multiple sclerosis or something like that, we make different proteins in our CSF, and so that would be a sign of a central nervous disease, a brain disorder. Or it might be for therapeutic relief if you've made too much of it, and you do a lumbar puncture. And this is how you do a lumbar puncture. You lie the person down on their side and you stick a needle into their back, and you take some of the fluid from beneath that subarachnoid space and you let 10 drops, literally 10 drops. That's about half a milliliter, 20 drops per milliliter. So you're taking about half a milliliter of fluid to look at under the microscope. And it's very safe to do a lumbar puncture in this area because the brain is a solid bit of nervous tissue. The spinal cord is a solid bit of nervous tissue, but the spinal cord ends at about lumbar vertebrae 2. So if we're beneath lumbar vertebrae 2, we've not got solid spinal cord, we've just got the little nerves that come off. So when we stick the needle into the back, you've got no risk of damaging the spinal cord at that point because these wispy little nerves can just move out of the way. They're just floating around in the cerebrospinal fluid. They will just move out of the way of the needle. So there's never a damage. There's never a chance that you will damage the nerves in a lumbar puncture. You should never say never in medicine. The risk is very, very low. So here's a picture of a beautiful baby, but this baby's head is actually growing a bit too fast, and this is called hydrocephalus. water, cephalus on the head, water on the head. And basically this baby is not draining its cerebrospinal fluid. If you leave it, it will get to be like this, because when the baby's skull is formed, when the baby is born, the skull hasn't formally fused together, and if too much fluid is made, then the skull can just get bigger and bigger. This is perfectly treatable. A friend of mine had a child with hydrocephalus. You put a stent from inside the baby's brain down into the stomach to drain the fluid, to reduce the size of the brain, and then the baby will develop normally. Quite amazing. But that is hydrocephalus. Uncommon, but easily treated. And then the blood-brain barrier we've already discussed. Thank you.